Real estate investors are quietly building their portfolio in New Hampshire. There's a few reasons why. Now, this is a video designed to kind of inform you about the New Hampshire market and also the submarkets within the New Hampshire market itself. Every market that you buy a property has submarkets. For you to be an expert, it's important to know that submarket and then those submarkets, essentially zip codes or even neighborhoods at that point. This is really going to focus on the New Hampshire market. There's a lot of mistakes that you can make if you buy in the wrong place or maybe an asset that's probably a little bit too much money given what the market is. So I kind of want to show you what this is really all about. The reality is the first rule of investing is don't lose money. And the second rule of investing is don't forget rule number one. I think that's a quote by Warren Buffett. And so it's important to remember that because when you're buying in New Hampshire, you do need to be careful at the markets that you're buying in, but understand that there are very sophisticated operators constantly building their portfolio here. One of the main reasons people are honestly investing in the New Hampshire market has to do with the proximity to Boston. Boston is a major economic hub. Realistically, the drive from southern New Hampshire to Boston with no traffic is like 30 minutes. With traffic is obviously an hour. That's a massive advantage because it's a huge economic driver in the country. And there's also another big reason which has to do with taxes. Massachusetts, nicknamed Taxachusetts to a lot of people, is a high tax rate market. And the reality is New Hampshire is a quote-unquote tax-friendly state. We have higher property taxes for sure, but there's no income tax or sales tax. So it's a highly desirable market for renters and homeowners alike to live there. Now, the reality is that we don't have as big of metros in New Hampshire. We don't have your Dorchesters, your Boston, or your Worcesters. We do have Manchester, Nashua, Concord, which are along Route 93, which are major economic hubs for the state of New Hampshire. There's also the seacoast, like the Portsmouth area, Dover, Rochester, that follow that route on the side of the state, as well as the western half of the state, which also has, Route 91, which has, the Keene Market, Claremont, etc. The major economic hub, though, is Hillsborough County, which includes Nashua and Manchester. Now, the reality is COVID boom was a real thing. During COVID, we saw pricing skyrocket across the board, especially in New Hampshire. Properties where their value has gone up tremendously during the COVID boom, and we're kind of seeing a little bit of settling now, but investors are still pretty bullish in the New Hampshire market. They're seeing as long as Boston grows and a few other markers like that increase, we're going to continue that basis for being bullish on the state of New Hampshire. Another big driver, besides the fact that people want to live here, essentially from the economic standpoint, there's also, realistically, from an investor standpoint, investor-friendly landlord laws. The reality is that, Boston's even implementing potentially on the ballot a rent control scenario. That's not present in New Hampshire. Realistically, the eviction process is also much easier in New Hampshire than it is Massachusetts. So you have a little bit of that friendly aspect and attitude towards landlords. Now, in terms of, again, desirability to live here, investor friendliness, we also have a strong rental demand. That proximity to Boston is really important because people can work there, but also New Hampshire has a lot to offer from just like a fun aspect of being outdoors. The reality is that it's a state that, people vacation to. There's mountains, there's lakes, there's proximity to like Portsmouth and the seacoast town, which is basically Boston of the north, which it's nicknamed for. And there's areas where the quality of life people are able to actually enjoy themselves there. So people enjoy actually spending their time in New Hampshire as kind of a quiet area to live where it's also considered very safe. Now, not just because of COVID, but in general, New Hampshire also has a housing problem. The reality is we're not building enough homes fast enough to keep up with the demand. And so rental demand is still quite strong. The rental markets are doing still strong and well. I think the vacancy rate is kind of hovering between 2% and 4% at this point. I think during COVID, it was like less than 1%. And at this point, the reality is it's still quite a stable market. The reality is the economic drivers, the cost of living, people are looking for those areas and where they want to live. New Hampshire's been an incredibly desirable place for both landlords and also renters alike. Now, with Boston being an economic driver, that means also Boston experiences higher pricing. And so you're noticing if you're trying to buy an asset in Boston, you're essentially paying for a high appreciation market with theoretically lower cash flow. Boston pricing is much higher than the state of New Hampshire across the board. You'll also notice that in Boston, just again, the affordability aspect is much more difficult versus the state of New Hampshire. Your entry point is much lower in New Hampshire, which is why wealthier individuals who are maybe residing in the Boston market end up buying in New Hampshire anyway because of the affordability index. Now, the biggest thing that COVID did essentially a few years ago was it changed the modern work environment. So like I was talking about before, people that are commuting to Boston normally, 30, 45 minutes essentially, maybe even an hour drive, obviously. The reality is that there's also remote and hybrid work. So maybe people that can find an affordable option to own, rent, or invest in New Hampshire are buying in more remote areas because they have that remote option to work if they are working out of a Boston area. That hybrid model kind of helped people push themselves towards more New Hampshire area. And the reality is the investors in the New Hampshire market are benefiting from spillover, from the rent growth that Boston's experiencing. Again, Boston, economic driver, they're having potential rent ballot. That's all pushing up towards the New Hampshire market. And in other words, investors are benefiting from the fact that, to be frank, if it's so expensive to live in Massachusetts, just go to New Hampshire. And so the reality is that there's still a ton of demand. New Hampshire is still a very demanding market. It is getting more expensive, and I think that's important to know. I know that as a personal buyer. I know that from working with clients. I know that from working with investors. But it's still a market that people are consistently buying in on a day-by-day basis because they're bullish on the fact that people want to live here. They want to actually live in the Northeast, more specifically New Hampshire, because there's a lot of other driving factors between economics, quality of living, even some of the education. The schools are theoretically getting better a little bit at a time, which is important. If I was coming into this market, what would be the kind of buyer that I'd want to be? Well, at this point, there's three kinds of strong buyers that I think that are in the New Hampshire market. Buy and hold investors, number one. Small multifamily owners as well. And third is also long-term planners, people that are trying to deploy capital and let it kind of sit for a little bit. I think that those three types of investors are doing really well. The average sale price, for a New Hampshire home for a single family is like just north of $500,000 at this point. It's not quote unquote affordable that people think of like $200,000 homes. And so to me, people that are buying small multifamily or buy and hold investors, it's a really strong market for you, as well as long-term players. They're thinking the economic drive and demand and growth for New Hampshire is going to stay. The speculation aspect that people want to be here long-term is there, and it is very real. Now, I don't think this is for you if you're kind of in the mindset of like almost like a crypto trader. You're a short-term speculator. You're someone that's kind of chasing hyper returns. I don't think it's the right market for you. I don't think the demand and turnaround is that fast enough. I think the supply and demand is going to make your life a little bit more difficult from a volume perspective if you're trying to buy properties, whether they're multifamily or what have you. But to me, you have to find the market that fits your needs. I work with investors like you every single day, every single week. And all of our agents at the Candor Investment Group work with people like you every single day and every single week. We are seeing plenty of people relocate capital to different kinds of assets, whether they're very large multifamily buildings or small buildings. The reality is you could also be buying your first rental. To be quite frank, renting a $3,000 apartment is really expensive. But it's kind of expensive, but worth it if you house hack and buy a 2-family or a 3-family where you rent out one side and you live in the other. You can kind of get a better return at the end of the day because after 5 years, the reality is that if you're a buyer trying to live in the New Hampshire market, but you can't afford the rental, look at a 2-family, a 3-family, or a 4-family. It could benefit you a lot. And so we see investors like you every single day. You could be buying that 1031 exchange property that you want to buy for your family's retirement essentially in 20 years, or buy your first 2-family. We've seen it all. And so happy to be the person to kind of talk with. If you're thinking about buying, selling, or investing, or honestly just relocating to New Hampshire, definitely reach out. I want to be the person that you can rely on for at least just solid information. The intention, to be honest, is that I've helped over 100 different clients across the board buy, sell, and invest in the state of New Hampshire. I'm bullish on it. I'm from New Hampshire, specifically Rochester. And to be honest, it's a great market to be in. Granite State is an incredible place to live and invest. I have people reaching out questions about their market, where they're from, their hometown all the time. You would be no different. I'd happy to talk you through any situation and see if New Hampshire is really the right fit for you. I can look at rental demand versus if it's worth it for you to sell, buy. Everyone has their own scenario, and I think it's important that you know that your situation is special, and we probably should try to talk through that. So if you're looking to kind of just invest in New Hampshire, if you're looking to buy, sell, or relocate, feel free to reach out. I talk to people like you every single day and on a weekly basis, just like all of our agents do. And so I'm happy to be kind of a sounding board in case you're kind of thinking about moving into the New Hampshire market or figuring out where you can shift. Now, if you look in the show notes below, you'll see my contact info. You can always reach out. I'm an open book. I try to make myself available for anybody that has questions. It's something I love talking about. I love building everybody's financial future and whatever that looks like. So I'd love you to reach out. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It's going to help us grow this channel. We're trying to make this pretty intentional at the Candor Investment Group. Thank you so much.